guys, so when you think of Waco, Texas, what do you think of? Chip and Joanna Gaines, right? Well, we're about to talk about Waco, Texas in a whole different way. We're going to be talking about the 1982 Lake Waco, Texas murders. And this involves the death of 3 teenagers, two females and 1 male, that happened near Lake Waco in Waco, Texas. So I hope you guys are ready, and let's talk about this case, shall we?
Hey darling, can I tell you what's been on my mind? Sick and tired of the night.
Oh man. Also, if you're new here, hey, I'm Liz. I'm your local creepy weirdo. This is Creating Crime Time, where I'm your host. I sit down, I talk about a true crime case, and most of the time I create something at the same time. So if you're interested and you want to get on that bandwagon, you want to stay committed in watching these videos that I release, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget, most importantly, turn your bell notification on to all, because when you do, you're notified when I upload, and I upload quite frequently. So, the 1982 Lake Waco, Texas murders. So, on the 13th of July of 1982, 2 fishermen discovered the bodies of Jill Montgomery, who was 17, Raylene Rice, 17, and Kenneth Franks, 18, in the Spiegelville Park near Lake Waco. Frank's body was found propped against a tree with sunglasses over his eyes. All 3 of these victims were repeatedly stabbed. Both of the women's throats had been slashed. There was also evidence that the women had been sexually assaulted as well. So this is not just a violent crime. This is a violent rape crime as well. So the investigation was initially headed by Lieutenant Marvin Horton of the Waco Police Department, and with the assistance of Detective Salinas and Patrolman Nicoletti. So Truman Simmons, who was the Waco Police Department, who was with the police department at the time, had been one of the first respondents on the scene, and he also assisted in the investigation as well, but in an informal capacity, not as a formal one. So he was kind of there, but he wasn't there. So initially, the investigation revealed the total, a different number of possible suspects. This included James Russell Bishop and Terry Harper. They were both local residents at the time who had been tied to the area at the time of the crime. However, both of the men had credible alibis. Harper's was later proven to be false when the detectives investigated it. But in September of 1982, the investigation began to stall, and it was marked as suspended. So nothing really happened with the case. They couldn't really do anything because there wasn't anything there, nothing prominent that they could go off of when it came to the death of these 3. So Truman Simmons, who was the one that was informally working with the police department, he worked with the department at the time, but he didn't want to be full-fledged on the case. He had taken a significant personal interest in this case, and he requested to be given permission to continue investigating the case while it was suspended, in which he was granted. Within a few days, a first arrest was made. A man named Munir Muhammad Deeb, which was the owner of a local gas station, was known to have a contentious relationship with Kenneth Franks, so he knew them, and the 2 had engaged in a verbal confrontation on multiple times. So, following the murders, Deeb had even commented to 2 young women that he committed the Lake Waco murders. After one of these women reported the comment to the police, Deeb was quickly arrested, and he submitted a polygraph test, which he passed, but he would be released due to a lack of evidence, unfortunately. So about a year goes by, and nothing happens until the work of Truman, Simmons, and others produced enough evidence to again arrest Deeb and 3 alleged accomplices in a murder plot. So Deeb had a life insurance policy for 1 employee in the store, and in his convenience store, and this employee had a striking resemblance to that of Jill Montgomery. Now, Truman hypothesized that Deeb had hired David Wayne Spence to murder her, and Spence and his 2 friends, Anthony and Gilbert Melendez, not to be confused with Menendez. I know it sounds really similar, but these had seen the other 2 and mistaken Montgomery for the target. So there was a whole lot of so they speculated that the other 2 victims had been murdered because they were witnesses to them killing Jill. So it was you're there, I have to get rid of you too type of thing. Deeb, Spence, and the Melendez brothers were all indicted in late 1983. Okay, so the district attorney, Vic Vazel, his office had been instrumental in continuing to pursue new evidence in this case. They managed to prosecute against the men that are accused of these murders. So Spence and both Melendez brothers were at the time already serving prison sentences for various different crimes. So the evidence against the men largely consisted of testimony that was provided by other inmates who claimed that the defendants had admitted their involvement in these murders in private discussions. So it was technically it's hearsay, as well as confessions made by Anthony and Gilbert Melendez. So this also considered the confession of Deeb, and the one that he made to the 2 women about his involvement in the killings, as well as the life insurance policy that he had taken out for his employee, Jill Montgomery. Bite marks were also found and present as evidence of Spence's involvement. So the trial began in May with testimony of a dental specialist, supplementing the evidence and that had been provided by a prison witness. In June, Anthony Melendez pleaded guilty to the crimes and was sentenced to life in prison. Spence's case was badly damaged by the Melendez brothers' confession, and it played a key role in his eventual conviction in July 1984. So unlike Melendez, Spence was sentenced to death for his involvement in the killings. Well, in 1985, Gilbert Melendez also pleaded guilty to the murders and agreed to testify against Deeb, so the initial man that they had in custody for this case. Like his brother, Gilbert received life in prison in exchange for his confession. Gilbert Melendez died in 1998 from AIDS-related complications, and his brother Anthony died in prison on the 13th of January of 2017. So Deeb, who continues to protest his innocence, was found guilty of instigating the murders on March 14th, and he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. So both Spence and Deeb continued to maintain their innocence following their convictions, and both men sought after appeals for their cases. In 1991, Deeb's appeal was granted when the Court of Criminal Appeals ruled that the testimony of a jail inmate should not have been allowed. So none of the testimony should have been allowed in the case. In his initial trial, so Deeb won his new trial in January of 1993, and he would be released from prison because all they had was these testimonies from other inmates. So those who were initially involved in the initial prosecution were stunned by this action. So the former district attorney, Vic Vazel, who prosecuted Deeb, stated the following: "I am perplexed and bewildered, as I'm sure a lot of people are, but in my mind this doesn't change anything as far as Mr. Deeb's culpability goes. So David Wayne Spence, the other man that was sentenced to death, his appeals weren't successful, and in April of 1997 he was executed for his role in the killings. Yeah, so there was a book written about this case, and it's called Careless Whispers. Yeah, every time I read this or read about this, I always think of George Michael. I'm not going to sing the lyrics because if I was even monetized at this point, I would get demonetized, so I'm not going to sing the lyrics. You can sing it to yourself. I love George Michael, though. So the book focused heavily on Truman Simmons' involvement in producing evidence in the case, which led to the convictions. There was also a TV movie written about this, made about this case, so a made-for-TV adaptation called Sworn to Vengeance that starred Richard Conrad as a fictionalized version of Truman Simmons, and the film aired on CBS in 1993. I've actually watched this. I watched this with my grandmother, and it was a pretty good movie. So, speculation and controversy. We're going to talk about controversy time, okay? So, there's a lot of controversy about this. So, following the conviction of Spence and Deeb, some began to question the actual, validity of the evidence on which the convictions were based upon, and the methods that were used to obtain them. So there's a forensic odontologist named Homer Campbell. I don't know why it took me so long to say that. I mean, it's a really weird odontologist. You don't really see that very often. You think it would just be like a forensic dentist. Anywho, this man was proven to have made false assessments around the same time when a blind panel examined alleged bite marks and molds of Spence's teeth. So, 2 of them matched a Kansas housewife. Wasn't even Spence. The other 3 couldn't match anyone else's teeth, so how did he match these 2 Spence? That's the thing. There's a lot of controversy about this. So 3 of the 7 people who said that Spence had confessed later that Truman Simmons had offered them privileges in order to secure their testimony. So including one that said he had fed her info on what to say. So here comes that coercion thing, which, if you didn't watch my last video about the Kelly Wilson case and the Satanic Panic, hello coercion. And this is in Texas. This happens, Kelly's case happens in 1992. This is in 1982, so this is clearly 10 years prior that this shit happens. So, also one of the victims, Kenneth Franks, was later alleged to have been an associate of Harper's in drug trade. So there's a lot of fishiness that's happened with this. So when Harper was interviewed by Spence's lawyers, he claimed that he was home watching Dynasty, and records show that Dynasty didn't air that night. So that was gone. Brian Pardo, who was a wealthy Texas businessman at the time, met Spence a few months prior to his execution, and he became convinced of his innocence. He listened to him. He didn't believe that he was guilty of the murder. So he later would launch a campaign to delay his execution sentence so that a new trial could commence. But his efforts were unsuccessful. But it did bring the case to light and attention to the case following Spence's execution. So there was a series of articles that was written in the New York Times in 1997 with headlines stating The Wronged Man, The Impossible Crime, in which a man named Bob Herbert, he's the one that wrote these, he claimed that the case had been cobbled and together from the fabricated and often preposterous testimony of inmates who granted all manners of favors in return. So basically, his summation of this is that these guys were just given whatever they wanted. They didn't, like, what's the word I'm thinking of? They could just get whatever they wanted because a cop told them that everything would be fine. Okay? Literally, the cop told them that everything would be fine. So, Truman Simmons actually just passed away. I wanted to look it up to see what I could find on Truman Simmons, and I kept the tab open. So, he died... Yeah, he died this year. So, November 1st, 2021, Truman Simmons died Saturday night in his home. He was 78 years old. So, I think it was reported on the 1st, and then it happened like the previous on Saturday. So, it goes in to talk about how he retired from law enforcement as a captain of the McLennan County Sheriff's Office. He spent 2 decades as a successful PI, working with defense attorneys, and then it goes into his work on the 1982 Waco killers case. He did avoid spotlight after this case, and even though all of like the writings about this, the books, the movies that were based upon this, he really tried to stay out of the spotlight. So people often said that they admired Truman Simmons for what he did for the Waco, Texas murders, but again, we don't really know. We just don't really know. So one part of this states that when he was the Waco police sergeant, he helped carry the bodies of these 3 out of the park when they were found. And that night, after he carried them out, so brought them to the coroner's van with the coroner, he vowed to like figure out who the killers were and to bring them to justice. So I feel like he got too emotionally attached, which is something that you can't do when it comes to criminal justice. You can't become emotionally attached. And now this is my own opinion. If you feel differently, that's on you. He saw these 3 and he just really wanted to make sure that their killers were found, or a killer was found, and he stopped at nothing to do so. But yeah, I found that. I was like, what? That, and I also found out that the last one of the 4 that were indicted in the murders died. So, let's see. Spence was executed in 1997. Gilbert died in prison for complications of like AIDS, HIV complications in 1998. Then Deeb died about 6 years after he was released, so in 1999. So he died from cancer. And the last one that was alive was Anthony Melendez. So he actually passed away. This happened in 2017, so January of 2017. He was the last of the 4 to be alive and in prison. And he died while in a prison hospice in the Michael unit in Tennessee Colony. Yeah. They also, so after he died, they kept his cause of death because of privacy guidelines, they kept his cause of death out of the media. Yeah, so that, my friends, is the case of Waco, Texas, and I'm sorry for tainting it. If you really like Chip and Joanna Gaines, I'm sorry for tainting your thought process of what a beautiful Waco looks like, because it really tainted it. Yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's case of the 1982 Lake Waco Murders. And I'll see you guys tomorrow in another video. Bye, guys.
the city lights.